10 years ago, the infamous Guantanamo Bay was opened. 10 years on, it's still there.
Guantanamo will be closed no later than 1 year from now.
It seems much of the Western world, at least, has forgotten about Guantanamo Bay. Many people think that it's already closed down.
What I believe is they were trying to send a message to the rest of the world, particularly the Muslim world. You go against us and you will be tortured.
Marking the 10th anniversary, we take a look at how Gitmo has changed our society forever and ask, why is it still open?
The process whereby Guantanamo will be closed no later than 1 year from now.
President Obama promised that he would close the camp down. 4 years into his term, it remains open. 171 detainees remain incarcerated, but that is only half the story. A British citizen, Feroz spent 3 years in Guantanamo after being picked up by the Americans in Afghanistan. He went there after converting to Islam, wanting to live under Islamic law.
Some Afghans who were anti-Taliban and allied with the US in a way, I guess they kind of bigged me up. I'm guessing, speculating, that they talked to the Americans and then made up a big story about me being so significant that instead of $5,000, it became $50,000.
Feroz's story is not uncommon. Many of Guantanamo's early detainees were effectively sold to the US by local Afghans, whether they had anything to do with terrorism or not. Feroz was initially accused of being a major Taliban figure.
How could they have got this idea then?
I haven't got a clue. They just keep on making these things up, and this wasn't the first thing that they made up. Subsequently, they made up a lot of other stuff as well.
Why do you think they were making this up?
I feel they needed to believe that they had actually got someone significant, and they couldn't bring themselves to believe that they got people that were insignificant. And then after 3 weeks, one of the military soldiers, interrogators, said that you're going to be transferred to America and you're going to be defecating in a bucket for the rest of your life without parole. I said, why? He said, conspiracy. And then that was it. So, and then I was transferred.
Conspiracy in what sense?
Just conspiracy.
That's what he said. What did you take to mean by that?
I don't know. It just conspiracy just doesn't mean anything. It has to be conspiracy to do something.
لأكفر بالله وأشرك به ما ليس لي به علم وأنا أدعوكم إلى العزيز الغفار لا جرم أن ما تدعونني إليه ليس له دعوة في الدنيا ولا في الآخرة.
Although Feroz is now free, Guantanamo remains open. After 10 years, it still holds 171 detainees.
There are protests all across the world this week to commemorate the opening of Guantanamo Bay 10 years ago, right across the United States, here in London, across the Middle East and elsewhere. However, they are relatively small protests. It seems much of the Western world, at least, has forgotten about Guantanamo Bay. Many people think that it's already closed down. However, there are some who continue to fight for its closure as strongly as ever.
Speaking to a packed hall in central London were the revered actress Vanessa Redgrave, human rights lawyers, and of course former detainees.
And when I was told in the back of a vehicle with a hood over my head that had just been lifted by 2 Americans dressed very badly as Pakistanis, that I would be sent to Guantanamo, I thought they were joking. They weren't joking. One of the men who...
After the conference finished, I asked Michael Ratner, an American lawyer who has represented many of the detainees, why the camp was opened in the first place.
The camp was illegal, a violation of international law and fundamental rights from the day it opened. It was opened for a number of reasons. One, because the U.S. government, the Bush administration at that time, felt it would be a law-free zone and that no court could tell it anything. It was open to keep people incommunicado so they would never be known about, and was opened as a torture camp. It was open so that people could be held without any court interference and be tortured. And that's exactly what happened at Guantanamo.
Guantanamo has now become synonymous with torture, sleep deprivation, beatings, and sexual assaults, just some of the allegations made. Many of the detainees have been there since its inception, usually without trial. In 2006, 3 detainees were said to have hanged themselves in their cells. The prison commander said that it wasn't an act of desperation, but instead an act of asymmetric warfare against us. Recent evidence, however, suggests that they may not have been suicides at all.
Guantanamo really stands for a symbol of 2 things. Everything the United States is doing wrong in the so-called war on terror, everything bad, from incommunicado detention to torture, but I think it's not closed because the United States likes having this symbol out there. Those guys in the orange jumpsuits and the hoods and all that. So when they say to the rest of the world, particularly the Muslim world, you go against us and you will be joining your brothers in Guantanamo. So they're using it as a warning message to people in the world who may, in some way, take on the United States.
I really believe Guantanamo was just about grabbing a lot of people to make it look like they're doing something about September 11th and terrorism. And then it was really frustrating to them that the people that they got were insignificant. The way I saw it in Guantanamo was just, just to put some blame on some other people for September 11th. And then that was us, and then, in Guantanamo Bay.
The Guantanamo is still open, and we still do not have the full truth.
There are now hundreds around the world who've been in and out of Guantanamo Bay. Perhaps one of the most famous is Mosam Beg, a British Pakistani who is accused of being part of Al-Qaeda. Now, he's set up his own campaign group, Cage Prisoners, which tries to help those who've been wrongly imprisoned. And as we're about to find out, Guantanamo is just the tip of the iceberg.
Operating out of a small office in East London, Cage Prisoners itself has come under vitriolic criticism, especially online, for helping out those suspected of terrorist activities. I asked Asim Qureshi how much time they had spent on Guantanamo cases.
Guantanamo's are a small part of our work. I mean, we put a lot of emphasis on it because that's where we started our work from, but also because it is, as you just mentioned, the very symbol of arbitrary detention worldwide. The reality is that Guantanamo is a very small part of the secret prison systems that they were using, of the other prisons that they were using around the world, the detainees that were held in Iraq under US custody, in Afghanistan, and particularly in Bagram. And there's many more detainees in Bagram than there are in Guantanamo, and they're going through many worse policies than the Guantanamo detainees are.
In 2006, President Bush admitted the existence of secret prisons operated by the CIA around the world. Suspected sites include Poland, Romania, and others throughout the Middle East.
We are adhering to the spirit of the Geneva Convention. When you say you're holding the prisoners in the manner you are, we're giving them medical care. They're being well treated. There is no allegation. Oh, there may be an allegation. There's no evidence that we're treating them outside the spirit of the Geneva Convention. And for those who say we are, they just don't know what they're talking about.
And then there's the notorious Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. Run by the US Army, serious abuse of prisoners is suspected. Not even the International Red Cross, which is usually allowed to inspect prisoners, is given access to all areas.
So it's crazy when you think that Guantanamo is actually the acceptable face of US detention policies. You know, that's really what we're talking about here, that is the face that the Americans have chosen to show the rest of the world. And when we consider the extent of human rights abuses there, you can only then begin to imagine how bad things are in the rest of the world.
It's a key point that the United States has not been secretive. In the old days, the 60s and the 50s, they would have hidden these things, and then if they had been asked about them, they would have denied them, because there was at least the understanding that they were illegal and immoral. What's changed, and it's a dramatic shift, is the United States no longer denies it, but actually publicizes it, which is saying to the world that we're changing the law. We're making it so that this kind of stuff is legal and acceptable, and we're proud of it.
Guantanamo set the agenda. Everybody else then followed suit. So unfortunately, we're seeing that when Guantanamo was the rules in Guantanamo established, it had a trickle-down effect throughout the rest of the world. America was supposed to be, or the Western world was supposed to be kind of like the bastions to human rights in the world and due process and the rule of law. But that very high perch that they were sitting on, they've fallen very far from there. So now you've got Russia and China in their annual human rights reports criticizing the US for what it's doing in Guantanamo. It's an absurd situation that you're being criticized.
Feroz took me to a police station just down the road from my own flat. He came here not long after his eventual release from Guantanamo Bay.
I came to the police station, I expected to be let in, but they didn't. They stood me at the door, and I said I wanted to speak to someone about a crime. I wanted to report a crime, and then they said, what's the crime? I said I was detained in Guantanamo Bay, my name's Feroz Abbasi, and I want to report a crime that British citizens were involved in my rendition, torture, and detention in Guantanamo Bay.
So as crimes go, this is pretty serious. You've been tortured, and you're saying that British people helped in that torture. They must have taken it pretty seriously, sure.
No, they actually tried to fob it off. It's my right as a British citizen, if I come to a police station and then tell them about the crime, they have to take it down. They did not take it down. The police officer put it down on in his notepad, and then said he would speak to his senior police officers and they'll get back to me. 2 days later they did, saying that it's out of their jurisdiction.
Guantanamo Bay may come under the authority of the Americans, but it's not just the Americans who have come under criticism. The British government have as well, for complicity, and not just for turning a blind eye, but for actively helping the US get their hands on so-called terror suspects.
The British government has already admitted that extraordinary rendition flights have landed in British territory. Most recently, however, UK police has launched an investigation into British involvement in the transfer of 2 Libyans into the hands of Colonel Gaddafi. Documents were found in an abandoned office building when Tripoli fell to revolutionary forces. Many campaigners say complicity and torture goes much further, but compiling evidence is difficult.
The last British resident to be held in Guantanamo Bay is Ashqar. He's been there for nearly 10 years. He's got a British wife and 4 children, the youngest of whom he's never actually seen.
At a press conference in London, detainees and lawyers are campaigning for the release of those still imprisoned, especially for the 89 detainees who have actually been cleared for release by the US government, but are still being held in captivity.
But if Ashqar was able to speak to you, he would tell you that he's in this little cell by himself because He's spoken up for justice, not because he's done any criminal act, not because he's done anything wrong.
Is it a matter of the Americans not wanting to be embarrassed by it all as well, to admit that they've just got it all wrong in the first place?
With certain individuals, there's clearly a question of the Americans not wanting to be embarrassed. So Ashqar, one of my clients, for example, should come back to Britain. The Americans wanted to send him to Saudi Arabia because they would effectively gag him so he couldn't ever say anything and couldn't complain about what's happened to him for all these years. On the other hand, now, though, it's more a matter of pure politics, that the Republicans are out to embarrass Obama. Obama doesn't want to be embarrassed.
Is that what they're guilty of, being part of a minority?
Well, I think in Guantanamo it's clear what people are guilty of. There are 100% of the 800-odd people who have been there are Muslims.
And what about the British complicity in this?
There's definitely British complicity in what's going on now, in main part, in trying to cover it all up. What we're seeing in Britain is a move towards making it far more difficult for the people and the media to get their hands on what really happened to people who are being abused or where the British were being complicit. And the British are trying to change the law to make that all more secret. And in a way, that's actually far more dangerous.
One of the few whose job it is to try and uncover information on terror suspects is Arno. He's a case study worker at Cage Prisoners. He was keen to tell me of some of the more disturbing cases. This is Khalid Al-Fawazi. He's been in a British jail for 13 years without trial. Initially, the British arrested him over allegations of involvement in the 1998 bombing of the US Embassy in Kenya. They questioned him and let him go, apparently satisfied that he was not involved. At the behest of the US, they picked him up again.
What we need to understand is that these things are going on in Europe and in this very country. And now this man, as I said, spent 13 years in prison without any trial. That's in a British prison.
So this has got nothing to do with Guantanamo?
Has nothing to do with Guantanamo, but it has because, as I explained, you know, the ideology behind is the same. Is that we can keep a man for over a decade in prison without any trial or charge.
And he's still in jail today?
He's still in jail today.
Then there's Muni Faruqi, a recent case. He was picked up by police in Manchester, accused of terrorist activities. He has been given 4 life sentences.
But what the court says in the judgment is that his ideology is criminal. That's basically what it's explaining. But there's no factual evidence for any plot. Of course, the way it's going to be portrayed in the media is that you've been arrested in relation with a terrorist plot, and initially that's what he said. You're arrested in relation with a plot, but actually, if you read the judgment, there's nothing about any explosion. There's no explosion. There's no bomb. There's not even a plan to bomb anything. It's simply based on your beliefs and maybe anti-imperialist beliefs. But as for now, he's in prison, and he might spend the rest of his life in prison.
For his beliefs?
Yeah.
Many fear that increasing powers for the authorities given to them by anti-terror laws are fundamentally changing our societies. And increasingly, it's not just Muslims who are in the firing line. We took a trip down to the Occupy London camp in central London to meet some more suspected terrorists.
Recently, the London police sent a letter to surrounding banks warning them of potential terrorist activities. Now, one of the terror groups mentioned as a potential threat were these guys.
This was just one of a number of police documents insinuating that Occupy London protesters should be grouped with major terror groups.
Ronan, are you a terrorist?
No, I'm absolutely not a terrorist. I think I would consider myself a peaceful protester.
And why would they do that?
There are many people out there that would not like, or obviously would not like this discussion, this conversation that have created to actually keep happening.
Since the economic crisis began, protests have been a regular sight on the streets of London. indeed across Europe and in the United States.
One of the particularly worrying things that happened at Christmas time is that somebody was on a flight home to Malaga, an Occupy London supporter, and they were refused entry to their flight because they had a flyer. When this kind of thing is happening, it's really concerning.
Why were they refused access to the flight?
Because this is completely to do with the terrorism extremist thing.
You were threat on an airplane because you're carrying an Occupy London flyer.
Exactly. What would those peaceful protesters want to do on a plane? I don't think he had intended to do anything on the plane apart from maybe read and have a sleep. But, you know, he might talk about inequalities.
Not blow it up.
I think that would be the furthest thing from his mind.
Some cases are even more bizarre. Last year, a group of students were convicted of disrupting a speech by the Israeli ambassador at their university in the States.
Foreign Minister of Israel. Those of you who know him.
We're living in a world now where there's all sorts of these types of cases going on, and it's not just about whether or not you were caught on the battlefield or caught planning some kind of terrorism plot. It's gone a lot further than that, and it is getting to the point of, you know, being ridiculous now.
This is Bashir, another former Guantanamo detainee. He was picked up by the US while traveling to Guinea to work in his brother's peanut factory. He spent 5 years in detention.
Our story, myself and my friends in this adventure, is very, very sort of absurd story. However, when I got to Guantanamo, there were a lot more absurd people. There were people there who knew nothing, who were illiterate, like, you know, farmers, peasants, and they were in Guantanamo, and the world looked at them as terrorists.
It came to the point where they had this thing about the guards. They prided themselves on being liked most by the detainees, so it ended up that, you know, I'd have to listen to their marriage problems and, you know, their problems with their colleagues, their problems with their bosses.
Did you ever feel sorry for them, for some of their personal problems that they told you, their marriage problems, their what have you?
Yeah, obviously, because, you know, on a human level, you know, it's you know, I did.
Do you think they felt sorry for you?
No, because they always justified it in their minds that, you know, you must have done something, and they couldn't believe that you didn't deserve what you got. So, because it meant that they were doing wrong. They have to be the righteous. They have to be the cowboy that, you know, rides into the sunset and did the right thing. They can't believe that they actually did wrong on the side of evil, as it were. I know some people would kind of find that a bit harsh, but, you know, I think Bush is an evil man. I think the people that kind of listened to him and went along with what he said are evil too, and I think history will show that.
Feroz says he is still finding it difficult to move on from the ordeal he suffered. However, he is one of the lucky ones.
Will I outlive Guantanamo Bay, or will Guantanamo Bay outlive me? And, you know, and the other detainees. So, the question is, who's next?
115.